Welcome to The Explainer. So today, we're diving into something absolutely fascinating. We're going to examine an ancient text that most people, kind of assume they already understand, the Book of Job. But I want you to completely put aside everything you've ever heard about this just being some simple, straightforward story of human suffering. Actually, scratch that. It's way more than a story. It is a brilliant, ancient literary detective puzzle.
Because here's the thing, this completely flips the script on what we think we know. In this text, Job isn't actually the one on trial. God's policies are going on trial, and a mortal man, Job, is just the star witness for the defense. What we're about to unpack here is how this ancient narrative uses extreme scenarios, dramatic irony, and even hidden wordplay to challenge our most basic assumptions about how the entire universe operates.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the Heavenly Courtroom. To really get this puzzle, we have to start at the very beginning, with the opening scene. And what's really interesting here is how this redefines a character you might think you already know. In this opening scene, God calls on the challenger to make his report. Notice how we're framing this. The challenger is playing an assigned role. He's gathering information for the king. This isn't a scene depicting a God who has no idea what's going on in his own universe. Rather, God has tasked his challenger, kind of like an ancient royal inspector, to go out, see what's what, and report back. It's exactly what a good ancient king would do.
Moving on to Section 2, Disinterested Righteousness.
So, the challenger brings back his report about Job, who has this famously easy, wonderfully hedged, protected life. And this brings us to the absolute core philosophical investigation of our explainer today. The challenger looks at Job's perfectly blessed life and brings up a core concept: disinterested righteousness. It's a fancy term, but it basically just means righteousness without self-interest. The challenger is essentially saying, sure, Job is a great guy, but come on, you've put a massive protective hedge around him. You've blessed his work, his flocks, his herds. This strikes right at the heart of what we call the retribution principle, the idea that good behavior automatically gets rewarded and bad behavior gets punished. The challenger is testing whether blessing righteous people is actually a viable, acceptable policy for God to have.
So he distills his entire challenge down to this one piercing question: does Job serve God for nothing? I want you to really think about this question, because it is exactly what's being tested here. If God removes the blessings, will the righteousness just disappear too? Is Job's devotion literally just a transactional business deal?
Which brings us to Section 3, to bless or to curse.
Okay, I absolutely love this part. To explore that question, the author uses a fascinating linguistic twist that acts as a hidden mechanism of irony in the story. It is just a brilliant play on words. The Hebrew word barak literally means to bless, but the challenger uses it euphemistically. He bets God that if the blessings are removed, Job will barak God to his face, meaning he'll curse him. But what actually happens? When tragedy strikes, Job ends up literally baraking, blessing God. It's exactly the word the challenger used, but with the complete opposite meaning. It's a spectacular piece of ancient wordplay that sets up the drama perfectly.
Let's look at Section 4, Tragedy and Job's Response.
So the challenger gets a free hand to act, and man, the resulting tragedy is absolute. We see human foes, divine judgment from heaven, natural disasters all just hitting him in rapid succession. Why so extreme? Well, for the whole premise of the book to work out, everything has to be sudden and it has to be total. All areas of Job's life are covered and all bring absolute disaster. It sets up the most extreme test case possible for God's policies.
And Job's initial response? It's just stunning. He engages in these common acts of mourning, completely prostrating himself in a powerful acknowledgement of God's sovereignty. He speaks those famous lines: "Naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I will depart. Yahweh has given, Yahweh has taken away. May the name of Yahweh be praised." Now here's the super fascinating detail. Notice the specific name he uses, Yahweh. Job uses it right here in this prologue, but then, through all those endless middle discourses and speeches of the book, that name completely vanishes. He only calls God El or Elohim until God finally speaks from the whirlwind way later in chapter 38. It's an incredibly deliberate structural choice by the author. Now, at first, Job's reaction is pure. Perfect, even. He blesses God, literally baraking him just like we talked about, and he doesn't charge God with wrongdoing. But I love how this epic text grounds itself in a very relatable psychological truth. It is so much easier to be strong at the very beginning of a crisis, isn't it? When you face an extended, agonizing situation, things naturally deteriorate as time goes on. Job won't be able to maintain this pure response forever.
And that leads us to Section 5, the power of hidden information.
This is the narrative mechanism that elevates this from a simple story into an absolute masterpiece of dramatic irony. That heavenly scene we've been talking about, it isn't just window dressing, it serves three vital functions. First, it completely confirms for us, the audience, that Job is entirely innocent. Second, by doing that, it deliberately eliminates the standard ancient Near East answer to suffering, which was basically just a strict law of karma, like if you suffer, you must have sinned. And third, it proves definitively that Job is not on trial here. God's policies are. Job is literally just the test case.
But here is the absolute picker, the ultimate dramatic irony. Job and his friends, they will never be told what took place in heaven. We get the VIP backstage pass to the heavenly court. We have the hidden information. But Job gets absolutely zero explanations for his tragedy. None. He has never offered reasons, and he will never know a thing about the challenger. So the crucial takeaway is this. Job originally thought in terms of that strict retribution principle. He, like his friends, and honestly, kind of like a lot of people today, thought that God's actions could be reduced to a simple mathematical equation. Do good, get good. Do bad, get bad. But the hidden information of the heavenly scene proves that treating the universe like a simple equation is fundamentally a huge mistake.
Which leaves us ending on this massive, really provocative question. If the universe cannot be reduced to a simple equation, if the retribution principle isn't the whole story, how do we respond when the answers to our deepest suffering remain permanently hidden? The Book of Job doesn't give us a neat little bow to tie it all up. Instead, it challenges us to consider the true nature of faith and righteousness, not as a transaction for blessings, but as a posture of absolute trust in a universe far too complex for our simple equations. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, keep looking at the text closely, and I'll see you next time.